Hey, everybody. Okay, good morning. It's Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. Welcome. It is the 13th of December, Friday the 13th, 2019. And welcome. I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to log in. It obviously has been a really historic day so far. While we're waiting for everybody to kind of pop on over here, I'm going to remind you all that we have a free webinar for our new 2020 program called Healing the Heroine today at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. The link has been in the show notes for the last couple of days, and I hope you will all consider joining us. It's going to be a very busy day here, but we've got a lot to cover, and I really am excited to talk to everybody about what this new offering is going to be about. Obviously, we've got significant breaking developments this morning and last night, and I want to go through all of it because there have been some very specific questions just about the next stages of the procedure, as well as what's sort of being signaled. I'm writing on my hand, signaled from the Senate and the House about what's likely to come next. And really important that we're all sort of aware of the next stages of the process. All right, so as people are logging in here, obviously, the biggest breaking news this morning is that the Judiciary Committee did vote this morning along party lines to advance the articles of impeachment to the floor of the House. Based on where we are now, there's a schedule that has been tentatively announced for next week. So on Tuesday, the articles of impeachment will be reviewed in the House Rules Committee. Hang on, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in 1 minute. And then on Wednesday, it is anticipated that there will be a full debate on the floor of the House and then a vote to actually impeach the president. So let me say a couple of things about what we sort of saw in the last 24 hours. The committee debated well into the wee hours of the night last night. What we basically saw was the same repeated talking points over and over again from the Republicans. Like literally, this went on yesterday for the better part of 16 hours. There was not really any option that any of this was going to change anything. And as I predicted yesterday, it didn't. The only interesting thing here was that Nadler did decide to hold the final vote today instead of last night. There were a number of strategic reasons that have since been suggested for that. I will just add they were all exhausted, and it didn't surprise me one bit that he called it. But the other thing here is that it's important for Americans to see our democracy in action. And at 11:30 at night on a Thursday, the vast majority of the country was no longer awake. I was, because it was Pacific time. But the reality of where we found ourselves was that there were not going to be a lot of people to kind of be watching that. And so I actually appreciated it from that standpoint. I'm also sure that the committee and all of the staff really just needed to rest, knowing that what was going to happen today was going to be very significant. Doug Collins had a massive meltdown on television, arms flailing and everything else. The reason for that meltdown was simply that members of the GOP on the committee were going to miss their airplanes. I personally found it ridiculous. But nonetheless, that's where we landed. And again, I will just mention there were no major points scored yesterday by the Republicans. Nothing new that came out of that. It was all very much for an audience of one. And so I'm not at this point particularly shocked by anything that happened yesterday. We did have the vote this morning. Again, very somber. I will add that the mood inside the Judiciary Committee this morning was very different than where it was when the committee went into recess last night. Everyone seemed particularly grave and chastened and somber this morning, including the Republicans. And from the standard of where we are right now, it's one of the most serious moments in American history. So that doesn't actually surprise me. All right. So next stages, as I said, next Tuesday, the articles of impeachment will be reviewed by the House Rules Committee. We had some requests this morning to discuss what the House Rules Committee does. So let me just explain this to you in a kind of short form. The House Rules Committee does a lot of things, but this is what they're likely to do here. They will decide on whether or not amendments to the articles of impeachment will be considered on the floor of the House. They will likely also set various limits on the length of debate. There may be some decision making made on how long the debate will run altogether. And that's something that the House Rules Committee does on a regular basis. It is not, again, at this stage, it's pro forma. This is just a procedure that the articles of impeachment are going to flow through before they get to the floor of the House. It's not like the House Rules Committee is going to stop the articles of impeachment from being heard on the floor of the House. And so this next step is really to establish whether or not amendments are going to be heard by the full House, and the length of debate. So that will happen on Tuesday. The full debate on the articles of impeachment will then happen on the floor of the House on Wednesday. The assumption is that there will be a vote on impeachment on Wednesday, December 18th. And that the president will, in fact, be impeached by the full House of Representatives. So that's the next step there. Now, once again, this morning, we've had a lot of questions about this purported flagged idea of the full House voting to impeach the president and then not sending the articles of impeachment over to the Senate. I've discussed this already this week, but it was asked as a number of times again on the question feed this morning. So I'm just going to say it. I am flat out not in favor of that as a strategy for a wide variety of reasons. The first is that additional evidence that is gathered between now and January can be used in an impeachment trial on the floor of the Senate. The second is that it is incredibly important right now that we do not give the GOP an opportunity to regroup on their messaging. I am not thrilled at all with the idea even of the break that they are going to have over the holidays to kind of decide what their strategy is going to be here. We'll talk about McConnell's statements on Fox in just a minute, but from where we sit right now, momentum is with us. It's necessary. The president needs the message that this train is not going to stop. So I think that one of the reasons why this is sort of like being floated as a strategy is out of fear. I'm going to tell you that whether the president is impeached today or tried today or tried in January or tried in 3 months, the likely change in outcome there's not likely to be a change in the outcome of it, frankly. And personally, my sense about this right now is that I very much want this president to know that there's at least some people who are going to hold him accountable. And I want him to be afraid of a Senate trial. Again, I'm going to remind you all, I know what McConnell said. We're going to talk about that in a second. I understand that, there are reasons to consider all the viable outcomes at this point that may emerge from a Senate trial. What to me is not an option is to respond to the idea that the president may be acquitted by stopping the process. That to me is a profound sign of weakness. It is a sign that the president will take and run with. I, by the way, also want every member of the GOP to have to stand up and say that they're going to stand by this criminal president. So to me, and reminder here, by the way, it's not like there can't be other articles of impeachment added later. It's not like he can't be impeached again. So the idea of stopping because we're afraid, to me, it's not a viable legal strategy. It's not something I would ever recommend. To me, the idea of doing that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I've said that this week, and I'm saying it again only because y'all have asked me that question again. All right. So Mitch McConnell made a series of statements last night on Fox News that were profoundly disturbing. I'm not going to beat around the bush about this. Basically, what he said was that he was going to allow the impeachment process to be led by the president's lawyers. That in and of itself is a sign, of course, not just of the complicity of the GOP, but also the fact that Mitch McConnell himself is compromised. Again, I'm going to remind you all, nothing is done until it's done. And again, we don't know. The other thing I want to remind you all of is that today is the day that the Supreme Court in their judicial conference are going to decide whether or not they're going to hear these cases about the president's taxes and financial records. If they opt not to hear those cases, the lower court decisions will stand, and those subpoenas will have to be complied with by Deutsche Bank and others. At this stage of the game, the thing I want to remind you of also is that the potential disclosure of the president's taxes and the criminality that may be revealed therein is in and of itself something that could force the resignation of this president. Mitch McConnell's statements that this is how he's going to run the trial in January. Well, we've got a window between now and then, right? And we don't know what's likely to happen in the facts that are going to be revealed, or the president's own mindset, or what the lawyers are going to recommend here, or for that matter, what the public is going to do in response. And so while it is absolutely out of line, unethical, beyond the pale of what democracy requires from the standpoint of separation of powers and checks and balances, that Mitch McConnell made the statements that he made last night, we will not know how this plays out until it plays out. And so I think there's reason to be very concerned. Do I think that it's a reason to stop? Again, I'm going to say absolutely not. We have to approach this from the standpoint of I've talked about this a lot. Those of you who have been in my programs and have studied with us at the Gaia Project for Women's Leadership are going to know this concept to be very familiar. The concept of the terror field. So there's a principle in human capital management that talks about the idea that if you are doing something for the first time, as you progress closer and closer to the achievement of the goal, you're going to confront higher and higher levels of terror. And one of the things that's known about the way that the terror field works in the concepts related to human psychology is that if you hit a point where you are so terrified that you turn around and go back and avoid the goal or avoid the end game, the next time you set out to do it, you're going to be way more scared than you were before. And it's going to be exponentially more difficult to reach the end game. If at this moment in time, just applying this principle to where we find ourselves on impeachment, we choose to turn back or stop or say like, eek, the chances of us being able to ascend the next time are going to be exponentially more difficult. And part of that will be because the GOP will see it for what it is, which is the Democrats being too afraid to go forward and try this president. I'm just not a person who is going to back away from that, and frankly, I just think that even in light of what Mitch McConnell said last night, the only viable strategic option is to continue toward the enemy, flat out. I will say to all of you, and I've said this repeatedly over the last 24 hours, that I think that we all have to start thinking about the potential outcome of an acquittal of this president and what that's going to mean. Stopping, again, I'm going to say it again for everybody who logged in after I said this, stopping now is not going to alter that outcome. The things that change that outcome are like the disclosure of the president's taxes, which may be on a timetable we could see them between now and when an impeachment trial starts. Again, we have to think about this in the big picture and strategically, and not react from a place of panic. I'm not going to deflect from McConnell's statements. All I'm going to say about that is that we have yet to see what that's going to look like on the floor of the Senate. All right. That's my opinion on that. And, I'm just going to say this, it's not going to change. I will tell you that, one of the things that any good prosecutor or any good plaintiff's lawyer will tell you is that the thing that you don't do, by the way, and this is another thing that kind of informs my opinion here, the thing that you don't do when you are charging toward an enemy that is back on its heels and potentially a little bit scared, and trust me, the president tweeted more than he ever did yesterday in real time. He's terrified of this outcome. He's publicly humiliated right now. He's going to be further publicly humiliated next week. The thing you don't do is stop, because that's how you lose cases. And we may lose anyway, right? Like, that's the thing about litigation. That's the thing about where we find ourselves right now in impeachment. We may lose. We need to start getting prepared for that outcome. And it's not a guarantee. It's not written in stone. But the thing that we absolutely can't do is back down from the challenge of holding this criminal president accountable. All right. I already talked about the Rules Committee. Giuliani returned from Ukraine on Saturday. He was seen entering the White House this morning. Apparently, there are reports that the president called Rudy Giuliani when he was taxiing on the runway and said to him, "What'd you get?" One of the things that I want to make very clear about this is there's no question at this moment in time that the criminal conspiracy is continuing. This is another reason, yet another reason to not back down from where we find ourselves right now. Again, his presence at the White House is apparently to figure out what the response is going to be to today's developments, and to prepare. Please don't do that on this feed. I'm just going to say this right now. Whoever just wrote that about arming yourself, delete that comment. The thing that I'm never going to do on this feed, and I'm sorry for reacting to this in real time, but it makes me really angry, is recommend that actual violence. And by the way, that's something that could get this broadcast shut down, and it could get me arrested. Delete that comment. I'm going to say this right now from the standpoint of where we find ourselves. Okay. The reality is that there is an ongoing criminal conspiracy right now. There is, at this moment in time, an ongoing concern about the president's criminality. And from the standpoint of where we find ourselves at this moment in time, it is profoundly important that we understand that the president is going to continue doing this. He is continuing to do it in real time. They're not hiding it anymore in any way, shape, or form. At this stage of the game, where we find ourselves is needing to find ourselves in a place where we continue to respond in real time to the president's actions, and that means, by the way, that we are at this point needing very much to continue to shout out everything that is happening in relation to this administration while it is going down. All right. Okay, I want to say a couple of things about the UK election because it relates directly to where we find ourselves. Last night the results in the UK election were profoundly disturbing. The Conservative Party, the Tories, ran away with a supermajority. It was basically like a wipeout for the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. The only party opposing Brexit that came out very far ahead is the Scottish National Party, which took 55 of 59 available seats in the Houses of Parliament, and now on deck will be a push for Scottish independence. The UK, as it stands right now, is not going to exist in the same form within a year. That's my prediction. And I will tell you that for those friends of mine who are at this moment in time in the UK or watching from anywhere in the UK, because we have a lot of followers over there, want to just remind you all that from the standpoint of where we are, this is something to pay very close attention to. There are a lot of commentators who are saying, obviously, we can't compare what happened in the UK with what happened here. Jeremy Corbyn was had made some serious anti-Semitic comments, was not considered to be a very compelling leader, and that may have contributed to all of this. But we also can't discount the fact that and quite a number of people who were lied to repeatedly voted directly against their own interests to get the Conservative Party the majority that it now has. What this means for the rest of us is that there is going to be a Brexit one way or another, most likely a hard Brexit by the end of January that is going to have significant implications on the world stage and to the global economy. There are some now who are saying that because so many folks from Labour moved over to vote for the Conservative Party and the Brexit Party got 0 votes, even though Conservative Party is in favor of Brexit and it's led by Boris Johnson, who is part of Leave. There are a lot of people who are saying, well, maybe it'll be a soft Brexit, maybe a new deal will be renegotiated. But the thing that is guaranteed not to happen now is a new referendum on Brexit. So Brexit is going to happen one way or another. So the things I just want to take away from this, just as like a bit of a warning, okay, and again, this is my opinion. I'm going to say this very clearly at the top. There are a lot of commentators who have said, like, let's not make comparisons here. I'm just going to say this. One of the things that was really dangerous about what Labour did here is that they refused to take a hard stand against Brexit. The position that they took was, we'll figure it out, right? Like, we're not necessarily pro-Brexit, but we'll bring the vote to the people. I will tell you that I think that sort of wishy-washy centrism is not going to play well for the electorate here. It obviously did not play well for the electorate in the UK. And one of the things that means to me is that we need to have very strong progressive voices in the Democratic Party and a very profoundly strong nominee who is willing to speak truth to power. You all know that I've endorsed Elizabeth Warren. I'm not backing down from that endorsement. I happen to think that she is somebody who stands in the position of really being unafraid to really speak the truth of what is happening in this country with regard to income inequality and how that is impacting every one of us adversely. She also has a really profound degree of support right now from powerful Black women activists. That to me is a very significant feature. The thing that is not going to fly in this country, and I want to make this really clear because I do take this as a sign, is the wishy-washy centrist white old guy like Joe Biden. Because by the way, I'm going to tell you right now, I see him very much in the same mold as Corbyn. I know there are a lot of people out there who are saying, well, Corbyn's more like Bernie. You all know I'm not a Bernie fan either. I have to say he endorsed a candidate here for Katie Hill's old seat yesterday who I abhor. There are lots of things to consider about this going forward into the 2020 election. The thing that I will say here from the standpoint of takeaways is that the one thing that is really, really clear here is that we need a compelling candidate who inspires people to get out the vote. And I think Corbyn's, role as a candidate is in part to blame here, at least significantly enough to blame here, that it's a lesson we should consider very carefully when we look at the 2020 election right here. Okay. All right. I want to talk for just one more second about this issue of what do we do in the event that the president is acquitted? Because I know it's very much out there in the forefront of everybody's mind right now. And I'm going to encourage everybody, by the way, if you have not read it yet, to go read Michelle Goldberg's column in the New York Times this morning called Democracy Grief is Real. It talks through, her conversations and interviews with therapists who are confronting this sort of thing that I see all the time in our community of feeling really depressed, feeling very much out of control, this kind of rage, grief, and fear cocktail that all of us are living through right now, which is real. And again, I don't think there's any debate about that. I will say that her column, however, points out something very significant at the end. And it is the fact that acceptance of the outcome is a death in and of itself. And the thing that is really key to making sure that we get through this is never accepting the reality of where we find ourselves as normal. And indeed, the column ends on a note that says we have to transform our grief and our rage and our fear into activism like we have never seen before. That the only way out of this is to make sure that we transform those powerful emotions that we're all living through into organizing and action. I'll just add, Bree Newsom, who I follow religiously on Twitter, has basically pointed out the same thing this morning. One of the things that she has pointed out is that if what is truly going to happen here is that the Senate acquits him, we will be fundamentally living under a dictator between now and at least next November. And that is going to require us, again, this is something I've been preaching for the last 3 years, but I'm going to say it again here, to do things that we have never considered doing before to keep communities that are vulnerable safe, to organize against this administration, to fight back in ways that are civil, peaceful, nonetheless, get us into a position where our voices are being used in ways that they have never been used before. It's going to require new coping strategies. And, I'll just add that, I did all this research yesterday while I was watching the impeachment hearings go on about the nature of annihilation bursts, different from extinction bursts. Annihilation bursts after the president is acquitted as a potential outcome. One of the reasons why I did this is because narcissistic personality disordered people, those of you who have been in relationships with them know this. At the moment where they emerge from a humiliating event, and feel like they've gotten away with whatever it is that they've gotten away with, then instead of doing what the rest of us would do, which is probably being like chastened, right? Like, ooh, grateful that, maybe the adverse consequence that I expected didn't come to pass. Learning and growing from that experience, right? This is what non-disordered people would do. Taking in constructive criticism, thinking through how it might alter our behavior in the future. No, narcissistic personality disordered people seek to annihilate the populations or the person or the object of their public humiliation. And so one of the things that we have to get prepared for here in the event that the president is acquitted is that we are going to see targeted, potentially violent action by this president against communities that have stood against him. Whether that's the Democratic Party, whether that's commentators like me and others, whether that's the lawyers who have sought to hold him accountable, there are going to be some very serious upticks in actions on his part that will make it, I'm not coming on here to be fatalistic and depressing. They're going to make it worse than it's ever been. And, if that's the outcome that we are facing right now, we need to start getting prepared for how we're going to deal with that. So, one of the things that I just want to reiterate here is that, again, we're not there yet. And there are a whole host, thousands of possibilities of the way this could unfold between now and the end of an impeachment trial that could alter that possible outcome. I do not want to leave everybody in a position of hopelessness. I certainly don't think that's where we are yet. And I will tell you that, again, this is the reason why. Again, the list of moderate senators to call is posted on the question feed again this morning. You should go find it. You should continue making those phone calls. If you have not made them yet, you should make them for the first time. It doesn't matter if they hang up on you. It doesn't matter if they say they think the president hasn't committed any crimes. Your only obligation right now as an American citizen, in my book, is to keep making those phone calls. I'll just add to this that from the standpoint of anticipating possible outcomes, the one thing that you can do to guarantee that the needle at least has some chance of moving is to continue to make your voice heard against the senators who are going to vote on whether or not the president should be removed. But all that said, one of the things that I just want to start getting everybody thinking about, right, is that the things that you have done until now, because I'm just going to say this, like, I know that I've been sitting here for 3 years and I've been advocating for everybody to get very involved. I will just mention, by the way, that 2 of our RISE grads got sworn in yesterday as first-time candidates to offices that they won in the November election. So there's, quite a number at this point of people who have done things that they have never done before. There's also quite a number of people in this community, and I'm just going to shout you out because I see you, who are leading very, very busy lives and have really not done much except make some phone calls and show up at a women's march since the election. That doesn't mean you're not awake. It doesn't mean you're not paying attention. It doesn't mean you're not outraged, but it does mean that you haven't changed your behavior. The thing that I'm going to tell you right now is that if the fundamental outcome of this is that the president gets acquitted, you're going to have to change your behavior. There's not going to be any kind of like possible way to live through this without doing that. Because the reality is that if what we are doing is moving in the direction of an oligarch fascist state, people who you know and love, if they have not yet been impacted, are going to be impacted by the conduct of this president and his administration and his enablers. So if you have not yet gotten involved in your local Democratic Party machine for the 2020 election, now is the moment to do that. If you have not yet started thinking about the candidate that you're going to canvass for, now is the time to do that. If you have not yet made your plan for 2020 and what your engagement is going to look like, it's really important that you do that. And again, I just want to mention right now, like, there, your cynicism and your bitterness is real. Like, this is one of the reasons why I'm talking about Michelle Goldberg's column this morning. Your cynicism and your bitterness and your grief and your rage and your fear is real. The thing that guarantees the destruction of American democracy is capitulation and acceptance. And so, again, I just want to say this, like, I know we've all been doing a lot. I know this is incredibly painful. I know it's extremely difficult. I'm living it myself, right? And also, this is a moment to understand that if the worst possible outcome of the impeachment trial is his acquittal, and that comes to pass, we absolutely must be ready for the next stage of what is coming in this country, and our preparation for how we're going to try to make sure that the 2020 election gets him out of office. And also that, by the way, we managed to keep people safe in the interim. So, humanity, kindness, generosity, compassion, all the things that we say we value need to be in play now. And that means that we all have to get out of our little bubbles and our houses and our shells and the little communities that we operate in on a day-to-day basis and find ways to make a bigger impact. And I'm just going to say this, that doesn't mean running for office necessarily. It can. But the thing that I'm really thinking about now is how every one of us can get invested in our local communities to create greater zones of protection for people who need it. Because we're going to be crossing into very, very frightening times. We've already been there. It's going to get worse if he's acquitted. And we've got between now and the 2020 election to try to continue fighting back. All right. So one last thing I want to say about this. Mike Huckabee raised a huge stink yesterday by saying that he was going to go on Fox News and advocate that the president should get a third term. One of the things that I just want to flag here, notwithstanding the fact that that was very plainly a shiny object for yesterday, but it is a statement that we should all pay attention to. The president at his rallies in the last few weeks has been signaling this idea that he should be able to stay in office for as long as he cares to. We need to be prepared for the possibility that not only will election interference be unhinged and unrestrained for purposes of the 2020 election if he's acquitted, we also need to be prepared for the possibility that he may try to cancel the election altogether. And paying attention to these little, trial balloons that they're sending up right now is also a way of making sure that we are discussing these things when we are using our voices and when we are calling our senators and when we are trying to create change. I just want to say this, I am not, again, all bets are not off yet. There's a whole host of ways in which this could go down that could force his resignation, or for that matter, a vote to remove him. But I will tell you that, I'm very concerned, frankly, about the place that our democracy will be in the event of an acquittal. And it is going to require all hands on deck, organizing like we've never organized before, and making sure that we are making our voices heard in ways that actually make a really significant impact. All right. Trying not to scare you guys today, but also want to kind of deal with the reality of this. And, again, reminder, for those of you who are really struggling, I said it yesterday, I'm going to say it again. There's nothing wrong with taking a break. There's nothing wrong with tuning out of Twitter and the news. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm not going to pay attention to this for 24 hours. I'm going to go for a walk with my dog, or I'm going to hang out with my kids, or I'm going to go out to dinner with my partner. We all have to make choices right now that allow us to keep going. And we also have to maintain the faith that the right degree of pressure, the right degree of events, the right turn of events, the dominoes that we cannot yet foresee as coming may change the whole scope of the outcome of where we find ourselves in the next few months. All right. That's it for today. I'm going to send much love to all of you. Again, historic day. I wish we were celebrating more than we are. But the good news about this is that the president will be impeached. That will be a stain on his record for the rest of his life. That's something that can never be erased, whether he's acquitted or not. And we're going to be in that place by Wednesday. So much love to all of you. Please get some rest this weekend and try to take a break. And I will talk to all of you on Monday, or perhaps I will see you on Facebook for the weekly summary in the next half an hour. All right. Bye, everyone. Take care.